Abigail White was a true internet star with an army of devoted fans. For several years, the girl had been successfully earning money on a popular site by sharing her revealing photos. Despite Abby openly talking about her happy relationship with her boyfriend, a horrifying reality was hiding behind the perfect image, which eventually came to the surface. This stunning story took place in 2022 in the city of Bristol in the southwest of Great Britain. Bristol is a large port city with a population of over 400,000. Interestingly, it's the only city in the country where the well-being of residents is on average higher than in all of Britain. It would seem to be an ideal place for a carefree and happy life. But even in such prosperous regions, horrible events sometimes occur that shock the entire community. It was here in Bristol that Bradley Lewis was born in March 2000. The boy grew up in a friendly and loving family. His parents, Steve and Rachel Lewis, were wonderful people for whom family always came first. Bradley had been a good-natured and cheerful boy since childhood. Like many of his peers in England, he was passionate about soccer from a young age and dreamed of becoming a professional player. While studying at St. Stephen's School, Bradley actively played for the local soccer team. He had many friends and buddies. As a teenager, he started going to parties, where at the age of 14 he met 15-year-old Abigail White. At the time, it seemed like a typical teenage infatuation that would pass with time, as with most peers. But who could have imagined what tragedy these seemingly innocent relationships would lead to? Bradley and Abby seemed like the perfect couple, young, beautiful, in love. But despite the outward idol, their personalities and life experiences were strikingly different. While Bradley grew up in a loving family and was surrounded by care and understanding from childhood, Abby had been through real hell and carried the burden of psychological trauma. The girl's family life began to fall apart when she was only 2 years old. Her parents constantly quarreled and even got into fights in front of their little daughter. When Abby turned 4, they finally divorced, and her mother took the girl to live with her. But not for long, soon a stepfather appeared in their life who turned out to be a real domestic tyrant. The mother's new husband not only abused his wife, but also raised his hand against little Abby. To somehow protect her daughter from this nightmare, the woman made the difficult decision to send her to live with her grandparents. So at the age of 4, the girl lost not only her father, but also her mother, finding herself being raised by elderly relatives. Of course, such traumas could not but affect Abby's behavior. At school, she constantly got into trouble, quarreled with teachers and classmates. Studying was difficult for her, her grades were low, and the threat of expulsion was very real. When the girl turned 13, at the insistence of the school administration, she was sent for a consultation with a psychiatrist. The specialist found a whole complex of psycho-emotional disorders in the young patient that required serious correction. As a detective with experience, I have often encountered similar cases. Unfortunately, children who have experienced domestic violence or separation from their parents often grow up troubled and unstable. They need a special approach, understanding and patience from adults. But unfortunately, not everyone receives proper help and support in such a situation. Apparently, Abby also did not have enough resources to cope with her demons. Despite all the difficulties, she tried to stay afloat and not give up. Perhaps that is why she so desperately clung to Bradley, a guy who promised her love, care, and security. But will this young couple in love be able to build a strong relationship despite all the trials of fate? You will find out the answers very soon, but I really want it to be those of you who right now subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write any comment to it so that this material can be seen by as many people as possible. This is very important for the social consciousness of society. Despite all the efforts of doctors and the prescription of antidepressants, Abby's life did not undergo cardinal changes. But at the age of 15, she met Bradley Lewis, and it seemed that a ray of light had finally appeared in her fate. The young man graduated from school, obtained a flooring specialist qualification, and started working, building his own future. Abby, on the other hand, chose a different path. Instead of looking for a permanent job or getting an education, she discovered the OnlyFans site for herself, a platform where authors can share content with their subscribers for a separate fee. And although this service can be used for various purposes, it is most famous thanks to models who attract fans with revealing photos. It was this kind of content that Abby began to create. Under the pseudonym Mitzi Lewis, the girl actively published her spicy photos, calling herself a fake Barbie. Her popularity grew rapidly, and with it, her income. In just 1 year, Abby managed to earn an impressive £50,000 sterling, over $60,000. It seemed she had finally found her niche and could count on a cloudless future. But was this success real? Could a girl who had suffered from psychological trauma and lack of love all her life find happiness in this way? And how did Bradley, who was used to completely different values, react to her choice? All these questions haunted those who knew Abby and her story. As a person who has repeatedly faced similar situations, I can say that quick money rarely brings true satisfaction, especially if it is obtained at the cost of one's own dignity and self-respect. Very often, behind outward success lies an inner emptiness and pain that cannot be filled with likes and subscriptions. Perhaps this is what Abby felt, despite her popularity on OnlyFans. Maybe deep down she understood that she had chosen the wrong path, but did not have the strength and courage to get off it. Or maybe she just didn't see any other way out, because she was used to the fact that life is a continuous struggle for survival. Be that as it may, the story of Abby and Bradley is still far from over. Whatever happens next, one thing can be said for sure. The path Abby has chosen does not lead to true happiness and harmony, and only by realizing this can she change something in her life. And just in case, I don't condemn OnlyFans so that you don't think anything for yourself there. I just think that in this case, it's inappropriate, in my opinion. And what do you think about this platform? Share your thoughts in the comments. It seemed that Abby had finally found her calling and could count on a carefree future. But already at the beginning of the second year of her career on OnlyFans, the situation changed dramatically. New models who registered on the site every day provided serious competition for the fake Barbie. Abby's popularity was rapidly melting away, and with it, her income. If in the first year the girl earned an impressive £50,000, in the second year it was only £12,000. Abby found herself facing the threat of a financial crisis. Meanwhile, the girl's family life was becoming increasingly difficult. At the time of the decline in her popularity on OnlyFans, Abby and Bradley already had 4 children. Although the details about their gender and age were kept secret, it is known that Abby gave birth to 1 child from another man. The young family huddled in a small house, and Bradley had to work a lot to provide his loved ones with a decent existence. Fortunately, Bradley's parents always supported the young couple and took an active part in raising their grandchildren. This was a real joy for Abby, who often posted happy family photos on social networks. But behind these idyllic pictures hid a completely different reality full of conflicts, resentments, and misunderstandings. Abby and Bradley's relationship had never been easy or cloudless. Over time, the girl began to have problems with alcohol and drugs. She often came home in a state of heavy intoxication, which could not but affect the atmosphere in the family. Abby herself vehemently denied having a serious addiction, blaming everything on fatigue and stress. As a psychologist, I often encounter similar cases. Unfortunately, people who have experienced psychological trauma in childhood often seek solace in alcohol or drugs. It gives them the illusion of control over their own lives and helps them escape from painful memories. But in reality, such behavior only worsens the situation, destroying not only health, but also relationships with loved ones. It seems that this is exactly what happened to Abby. Instead of seeking professional help and working on herself, she chose the easiest path, self-destruction. And Bradley, who was used to traditional family values, simply did not know how to react to such behavior from his beloved. He either tried to support her or broke into shouting and accusations, which only deepened the gap between them. Gradually, their marriage turned into a battlefield, where everyone strove to prove their rightness and defeat the other. And the children suffered the most from this, growing up in an atmosphere of constant conflict and tension. And although outwardly Abby and Bradley's family looked quite prosperous, in fact it was cracking at the seams, threatening to fall to pieces at any moment. Abby masterfully played the role of the victim, complaining to everyone around her about her boyfriend Bradley. Supposedly, he was horribly controlling her, cheating left and right, and she couldn't live because of his cruelty. And although close people knew the true value of these accusations, the girl did not stop, painting herself as an unhappy martyr in the paws of a despot. But if only Abby had looked in the mirror, she would have seen there the real tormentor of this relationship. Because in reality, it was she who was having an affair on the side, not shunning any means to fulfill her whims. Moreover, she even managed to get pregnant by her lover and give birth to a child, whom she forced Bradley to recognize as his own. Lies, it seems, were as necessary for Abby as air. Meanwhile, Bradley's friends were sounding the alarm, begging him to run away from this madwoman before it was too late. "Dude, she's a complete psychopath. You're like a thing to her that she can twist however she wants," they whispered in fright. But the boy, madly in love, stubbornly refused to hear anything, hoping by the power of his love to turn Abby into an angel. But can you cure someone who has no intention of recovering? This is the question that haunted Bradley's mother, who could barely hold back her tears as she watched her son suffer. Every humiliating remark from Abby, every contemptuous look of hers struck right into the woman's heart. And somewhere deep down, she understood that this story could not end well. And she looked into the water, as they say. In the end, the quarrels and noise in the young family reached such proportions that social services had to intervene. From now on, Abby was forbidden not only to live with Bradley, but even to approach him. The boy had to pack his bags and move back in with his parents. But did this mean the end of their relationship? Or maybe just the beginning of a new act in this drama? As a seasoned detective, I have foreseen many similar stories, and I will say frankly, they rarely end with a happy ending. Such toxic bonds cling too tightly, the poison of manipulation and violence penetrates too deeply. And to break out of this vicious circle, you need extraordinary strength and determination. It would seem that the ban on seeing each other should have put an end to the toxic relationship between Abby and Bradley. But no way. The crazy girl simply could not leave the boy alone. Every day she literally terrorized him with calls, demanding that he return home for at least one night. And Bradley, as if hypnotized, time after time succumbed to these persuasions, neglecting basic safety measures. Meanwhile, Abby discovered a new way of self-affirmation for herself: social networks. With relish playing the role of a wronged single mother, she shot TikToks where she poured a ton of dirt on Bradley. And although virtual does not always correspond to reality, trusting viewers willingly swallowed this simple sentimental bait. In her tirades, Bradley turned into a real monster, soulless and a pathological liar. You can only get the truth out of him by interrogating him all night. Abby complained tearfully in one of her voice messages to a friend. And then a real bombshell. He says I need a psychologist. Like otherwise, one of us will definitely end up dying. And you know what? I believe I'm capable of killing. Even if later I have to rot behind bars. And probably to prove the seriousness of her intentions, on March 19, 2022, Abby decided to prove it. During another furious quarrel, the girl grabbed a knife and thrust it straight into Bradley's hand with a knife. The wound turned out to be no joke. The boy had to urgently rush to the hospital in order not to bleed to death. As a detective with considerable experience, I will say frankly, they do not joke with such statements. If a person has once crossed the line and allowed themselves to resort to violence, they will do it again. The only question is when the next outburst of aggression will happen and how serious its consequences will be. Unfortunately, Bradley was in no mood for abstract reasoning. Having patched up the wound, he continued to reach out to Abby like a moth to a flame. The boy simply could not believe that his beloved was capable of real atrocities. He forgave her all her madness time after time, hoping that a miracle would happen now and the girl would come to her senses. But the miracle did not come. Instead, the relationship between Abby and Bradley increasingly resembled a fierce game of cat and mouse. They either quarreled until they were hoarse or fell into each other's arms, as if trying to make up for lost time. And above their heads, like the sword of Damocles, hung the ominous shadow of the knife that so mercilessly plunged into Bradley's body. Bradley decided to cover for Abby when the doctor inquired about the origin of the wound on his arm. "I just bumped into something at work," the boy lied, not wanting his crazy girlfriend to get into trouble with the police. But after this incident, even he, hopelessly in love, realized it's time to run away from this madwoman, no matter what joint children they have. But no way. As if enchanted, Bradley reached out to Abby again and again, ignoring all the warnings of social services. And here, just 6 days after the knife incident, Thursday, March 25, 8 p.m, a chilling scream comes from the house where the White Lewis family lived. Abby, sobbing, begs for help, demands to urgently call an ambulance. The neighbor is the first to rush to the alarm, thinking that someone has fallen ill. But when the frightened Abby mutters something about her Bradley no longer breathing, the woman rushes to the White Lewis house to see with her own eyes what is happening there. And the picture that opens up is enough to make one faint on the spot. Everywhere you look in the corridor, in the living room, dark, ominous blood stains. But the real horror awaited in the kitchen. Right in the middle of the room on the floor, Bradley lay on his back, pale, motionless, clearly unconscious. And on the windowsill, a bloody knife stuck out carelessly, a silent witness to some terrible drama. The dumbfounded neighbor, numb with fright, dials 911 with trembling hands. A moment later, her husband bursts into the kitchen and freezes, struck by what he saw. What happened in this house? Why is Bradley lying motionless in a pool of his own blood? And most importantly, whose hands so mercilessly plunged a knife into him? All these questions swarmed in my head as the sirens of the ambulance and cops wailed. And something suggested that the answers to them would turn the life of not only the White Lewis family upside down, but also of everyone who even caught a glimpse of the abyss of their toxic relationship. Abby, trembling like an aspen leaf, was muttering something about some accident, begging me to believe that she had nothing to do with it. But how could one believe the word of a girl who was used to lying right and left? A girl who just a week ago admitted that she was capable of murder? The answer is obvious. Of course not. As an experienced detective, I know perfectly well. People with a dark past rarely change. And if they have once crossed the line of what is permitted, then they will almost certainly do it again. Simply because they are used to living by the laws of the jungle, where the strongest and most brutal survives. It seems that it was this primordial thirst for blood that pushed Abby to the fatal act. Unable to withstand another quarrel or simply going crazy with jealousy, she grabbed a knife and stabbed her beloved in the back, literally and figuratively. Or maybe it was all completely different. Maybe Bradley, driven to despair by constant reproaches and humiliating treatment, dared to fight. That fateful evening, Abby once again gave free rein to her demons. At the bar, she kept knocking back shot after shot, completely losing control of herself. Drunk and furious like a witch from a fairy tale, the girl swore at the staff and visitors, not mincing words. It seemed that she had completely forgotten about decency and common sense. Meanwhile, Bradley and his friend Ryan slipped into the bathroom, where the boy, unable to restrain his emotions, burst into tears. Through sobs, he confessed that he dreamed of running away from Abby as far as he could see, but he was afraid because his psycho girlfriend had threatened to take her own life if he left her. What a trap, my friends. Neither to run nor to stay. While the boys were sharing revelations in the men's room, Abby managed to get into trouble. Having been rude to one of the visitors, she earned a slap in the face and even fell to the floor. It's good that her friend picked her up and led her aside, otherwise they would have had to gather the beauty in pieces. When Bradley and Ryan returned to the table, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. Abby, without thinking twice, threw a glass of cocktail in her beloved's face and began to scream that he did not stand up for her honor. And when Ryan tried to calm his friend down, she spat right between his eyes. That's some lady, I tell you. At 7:30, the couple was already rumbling home in the car of their old friend Alfie, whom they had met at the bar. The guy said that all the way Bradley and Abby were gnawing at each other like rabid dogs, and as soon as they drove up to the house, the girl jumped out of the car and rushed inside, as if all the demons of hell were chasing her. Bradley sat with his friend for a few more minutes, as if anticipating something. As a farewell, he uttered an ominous phrase, "I will die when I return home." Alfie shuddered at these words. They sounded too creepy. Just in case, he left Bradley his number so that he could call if anything. Having said goodbye to his comrade, the guy went to meet his fate, and she was already waiting for him on the threshold, wicked as 100 devils and with a knife in her trembling hands. During a quarrel, Abby did stick the blade into her beloved's chest, and in just 20 minutes, the neighbor was already calling 911. A finale worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy. When the detectives began to study Bradley's cell phone, an unpleasant discovery awaited them. It turns out that over the past months, Abby had been bombarding the guy with hundreds of messages with threats, and so terrible that I'd better keep silent so as not to disturb your imagination. Before the trial, Abby was examined by a whole bunch of psychologists. Their verdict was disappointing. The girl has a borderline personality disorder, because of which she is not able to control her emotions and outbursts of anger. In addition, a few days before the massacre, Abby experienced a double stress, an abortion and the news of Bradley's new passion. No wonder she lost her mind. But at the time of the commission of the crime, she was in a completely healthy state. But despite all the diagnoses, the jury was relentless. After deliberating for 12 hours, they unanimously found Abigail White guilty of premeditated murder. The sentence is life imprisonment with a right to parole in 18 years. That is, this Missy will be released no earlier than 2040, when she turns 41. What a perspective. And while the killer is in prison, Bradley's family is picking up the pieces of their lives. The father admitted that the loss of his son was the most terrible tragedy for him, and the mother still carries this pain in her heart. But at least they can count on the support of the community. Hundreds of caring people came to Bradley's funeral. The soccer club where the boy kicked the ball even held a charity match and transferred part of the proceeds to the Lewis family. And the former coach, with tears in his eyes, recalled Bradley as a bright and sincere child, the true pride of his parents. As for Abby, she lost everything: her beloved, children, freedom, future. And this is probably the most terrible punishment for a woman who with her own hands destroyed what others would give their lives for. But will she understand her guilt? Will she atone for her sins? Who knows? One thing is certain, this bloody story will still fester hearts for a long time, reminding us of the price of jealousy and unrestrained passions. So be careful, my friends. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and may you never have to find yourself on the other side of the protective glass, either in the courtroom or in a prison cell. Because life is the most precious gift, and to exchange it for some emotions or grudges is a crime that has no justification. With this, our eerie tale comes to an end. Thank you for being with me all this time and living every moment of this drama. I hope it made you think and maybe take a fresh look at some things. Shannon, a 34-year-old woman, and 33-year-old Christopher met through Facebook, although initially Shannon declined the offer of mutual acquaintances to set them up. However, when Shannon faced difficult times in her life, it was Chris who became her support and backbone. Their relationship rapidly developed, and soon the couple in love moved to the town of Frederick, Colorado. On November 3, 2012, Shannon and Chris got married, deciding to create a strong family despite all the obstacles in life. They had two adorable girls, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. It would seem, what could be more wonderful than a loving family with two little angels? During the period when Shannon and Chris decided to start a family, doctors gave Shannon the disappointing news that she would not be able to have children. She was diagnosed with lupus, a serious autoimmune disease that often leads to infertility. However, despite this blow of fate, Chris did not turn away from his beloved. He assured Shannon that he would always be there for her and support her. It was Chris' persistence and love that helped Shannon accept his marriage proposal, and a real miracle happened. Despite all the health problems, Shannon was able to get pregnant and give birth to two wonderful girls. She was immensely happy because, in her words, she had amazing, crazy, wild children whom she loved with all her heart. But the good news for the Watts family didn't end there. Shannon found out that she was pregnant again, and this time they were expecting a boy, their first son and heir. The woman was incredibly excited because she knew that Chris had always dreamed of a son. She was overjoyed that she would be able to fulfill her beloved husband's cherished wish, and that their family would become even bigger and stronger. Even daughters Bella and Celeste were eagerly awaiting the arrival of their baby brother. Shannon had already chosen a name for her future son, Nico. It seemed that a bright and happy future awaited them. But as an experienced detective, I know that life often throws unexpected and tragic surprises. I can't help but note that Shannon was very active on social media. She constantly shared the details of her life on Instagram, keeping friends and followers up to date on all events. The woman loved sharing joyful news and created an image of an ideal, happy family. Shannon actively shared her life on social media. She often went live where she talked about herself and her children. Her Instagram feed was full of photos of the smiling Watts family. The woman participated in various online communities where she communicated with other mothers and shared experiences. If you judge by these bright posts and videos, you might get the impression that the Watts family was living an ideal life. At least, this is the image Shannon created for her followers. Outwardly, it seemed that the family enjoyed complete idyll and mutual understanding. Chris, the head of the family, worked for a solid company that specialized in oil and natural gas extraction. Shannon herself had previously been an employee of the Human Resources Department at a children's hospital. However, despite the couple's decent earnings, they still didn't have enough money for a comfortable life and to pay the mortgage on a spacious house with 5 bedrooms and a 3-car garage. Financial difficulties forced Chris and Shannon to file for bankruptcy in 2015. It turned out that the couple had significant debts for the mortgage, medical insurance, and treatment. It seemed that the perfect picture of the Watts family's life was starting to crack. But soon after the bankruptcy announcement, Shannon was lucky to find a new job at a company that sold dietary supplements online. The young woman enthusiastically immersed herself in this business because such work gave her more opportunities to spend time with her children and devote attention to them. At the same time, business trips, which were well paid, allowed Shannon to contribute to the family budget. At first glance, it might seem that the Watts family had found a way out of a difficult situation and could now enjoy a happy life again. But as an experienced detective, I know that deep problems and conflicts often lurk behind the outward gloss. Did Shannon's new job really help stabilize the family's financial situation? Or perhaps these difficulties were just the tip of the iceberg, and more serious problems were brewing in the couple's relationship under the calm surface? You will find out everything soon. June 16, 2018 became a special day for Shannon Watts. That's when she published an extensive post on social media where she shared her thoughts about her current life. The woman sincerely admitted that she was extremely satisfied with her new job and family life in general, I am in love with this lifestyle when I just live, enjoying every moment of my family, Shannon wrote. These words vividly demonstrated how happy and full of hope she was at that moment. In essence, with this post, Shannon sought to show the whole world that her family was thriving, that she and Chris were successful and friendly. She diligently formed the image of an ideal family on social networks, which one could only envy. Shortly after this post, Shannon went live, where she shared with her followers her grand plans for the future. In particular, she said that she and Chris were going to go to San Diego for the period from June 22 to June 26. And after returning from this trip, Shannon planned to go with her daughters to North Carolina to visit relatives. They were supposed to return home on August 7, and after a few days, Shannon had another business trip scheduled for just a couple of nights. She was full of enthusiasm and anticipation for these upcoming travels. The woman willingly shared all her plans on social networks, publishing joyful and optimistic posts. Eventually, Shannon's short trip to a seminar in Arizona came to an end, and on August 13 she returned home. Her closest friend, Nicole Atkinson, met her at the airport and drove Shannon home, dropping her off around 2 a.m. No one could have even guessed then that this would be the last time anyone saw Shannon alive. As a detective, I can't help but pay attention to some details. First, Shannon's excessive activity on social media and her desire to show the perfection of her life may be signs that things were not as cloudless as it seemed at first glance. Sometimes people try to hide their problems behind a bright screen of success and happiness. Second, the fact that Shannon returned home late at night and was met by a friend, not her husband, may also indicate some tension in the couple's relationship. Although, of course, these are only assumptions and we will need more solid evidence for final conclusions. So far, we only have a general picture of the Watts family's life, mostly created by Shannon herself on social networks. But what was really going on behind the closed doors of their house? What secrets did Chris hide? And what happened on that fateful night of August 13? As Nicole Atkinson told me, on the evening when she picked up Shannon from the airport, the young woman looked extremely tired and exhausted. It seemed that she had hardly slept recently. However, at the same time, Shannon's eyes shone with an unbreakable determination, as if she was set for something important. At home, Shannon was awaited by her husband Chris and their 2 little daughters. It would seem that after a busy day, the woman finally had a chance to relax in the circle of her loving family. But as it turned out later, this night became fatal for her. The next day, August 13, Shannon had an extremely important doctor's appointment scheduled. She was supposed to have another checkup in connection with her 3rd pregnancy. At that time, the term was 15 weeks, and the woman wanted to make sure that everything was okay with the baby. However, Shannon never showed up for the appointment scheduled for 10 a.m. Moreover, she missed a business meeting, which was extremely atypical for her. Close friend Nicole Atkinson sounded the alarm because Shannon was not answering phone calls or text messages. Usually, Shannon always took a very responsible approach to work and her motherly duties. She never allowed herself to ignore calls, realizing that something might happen to the children. Therefore, such inexplicable silence on the part of her friend greatly alarmed Nicole. After trying to reach Shannon all day, Nicole eventually decided to go to her house to find out what was going on. Shannon's car was parked in the driveway, which only heightened Nicole's concern. The woman approached the door of the Watts house and began to ring and knock persistently. However, no one answered or opened the door for her. And you know what? This was a turning point. It was from this moment that it became clear that something bad had happened to the Watts family. Shannon's behavior changed dramatically. She missed crucial meetings and did not respond to calls from loved ones. This was absolutely unlike her, especially considering her responsible attitude to work and concern for the health of her unborn child. The fact that no one was home, although Shannon's car was in place, is also an alarming signal. After all, this means that the young woman disappeared somewhere in the middle of the night along with her little daughters. Of course, at that time it was too early to talk about a crime. But intuition told both Nicole and me that there was something sinister and terrible behind this. Shannon would never leave her children and disappear like that without warning. There were still many questions ahead of us that needed to be answered. Where was Shannon and the girls? What happened that night in the Watts family home? And was Chris involved in this mysterious disappearance? Having received no response from Shannon, Nicole Atkinson decided to act decisively. She called Chris, who was at work at the time, and also contacted the police. At 1:40 p.m., an officer arrived at the scene, who also tried to get through to the residents of the house, but to no avail. Realizing that they could not cope on their own, The police officer contacted Chris and asked him to come urgently to open the door and inspect the house from the inside. Chris arrived at the call, and together with law enforcement officials, they finally got inside. Unfortunately, their worst fears were confirmed. There was no one in the house. During the search, the police found some alarming details. Shanam's cell phone was lying on the couch, wedged between the cushions. It seemed as if the woman had hastily thrown it there before. Before what? This question haunted me. In the kitchen, they found Shannon's purse, inside which were her wallet and keys. Near the stairs stood a suitcase with things, as if the young mother was going to go somewhere in the near future. However, all her personal belongings that she might need in case of a sudden trip remained in the house. There were even medicines that Shannon gave to her daughters. Shannon's car was parked near the house, and no one had touched the child car seats. It seemed as if the young woman had simply vanished into thin air along with her little girls, taking nothing with them that they might need. As a detective, I know that in such cases, when a person who is in a relationship disappears, we are always primarily interested in their partner or spouse. We try to find out if they have noticed anything strange lately, if they have any idea where and when they last saw their other half. The case with the Watts family was no exception, so Chris had to answer all these standard questions. Of course, at that time, we could not say for sure that the husband was involved in the disappearance of his wife and children. However, his behavior and answers could give us valuable clues and lead us to a trail. The situation looked extremely suspicious. Only Shannon and the girls were missing from the house, while all their things remained in place. If a woman decided to go somewhere, she would definitely take the necessary things and documents with her. And most importantly, she would never go on a trip without providing her children with everything they needed. No, this does not look like a voluntary departure of a loving mother. Most likely, something terrible and irreversible happened here. Unfortunately, that's how it was, and now you will find out everything. During the first interrogation, Chris Watts told the police his version of the events of that fatal night. According to him, Shannon returned home around 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was then that he informed her of his decision to divorce. If you believe Chris, the couple had an emotional conversation, during which they both cried and expressed their sadness about the inevitable parting. After that, as the man claimed, he went to work, and he never saw his wife again. Interestingly, a surveillance camera installed on a neighboring building did indeed record Chris leaving the house at 5:15 a.m. However, after his departure, no one else left the Watts house, which made the police officer think and call a detective for a more thorough investigation. During a conversation with the detective, Chris slightly changed his previous testimony. Now he claimed that Shannon returned home at 1:48 a.m. and at 4 a.m. They had that same emotional conversation about divorce. And only after that, at 5:15, Chris allegedly went to work. Strange, isn't it? Initially, in a conversation with the police officer, Chris mentioned an emotional conversation with his wife immediately after her arrival. And then when talking to a detective, he somehow shifted the time of this conversation by several hours later. It would seem a trifle, but in the investigation of such cases, every detail can be of decisive importance. Over the next 2 days after the disappearance of his wife and children, Chris Watts actively communicated with the media. He gave numerous interviews, appeared in the press, trying to create the image of a desperate and genuinely worried husband and father who misses his family. "My children are my life, they light it up," Chris assured journalists, complaining that his beloved girls had disappeared without a trace somewhere. He diligently played the role of a loving dad who couldn't find a place for himself from grief and anxiety. But as it turned out later, this theater did not last long. Already on August 15, 2018, just 2 days after the disappearance of Shannon and the girls, Chris Watts was arrested. He was charged on 3 counts first-degree murder. Something didn't add up in Chris's behavior and testimony. His emotions seemed feigned, and the details of the story were confusing and contradictory. It seemed that the man was hiding something and trying to divert suspicion from himself. Of course, at that time we did not yet have direct evidence of Chris's involvement in the disappearance of his family. But his strange behavior, changes in testimony, and excessive attention to his own public image in the media were alarming. A truly loving father in such a situation would hardly be concerned about his image in the press. He would move heaven and earth to find his loved ones. The arrest of Chris Watts was the first important turning point in this tangled case. Finally, the cops had a suspect, and now it only remained to prove his guilt and find out what really happened to Shannon, Bella, and Celeste. During the pre-trial investigation, Chris Watts agreed to take a polygraph test, and oddly enough, he failed to pass it. This was the first serious signal that the man was hiding something and quite possibly was involved in the disappearance of his family. During the next interrogation, feeling the pressure of the evidence, Chris finally confessed to the murder of Shannon. However, he categorically denied his involvement in the disappearance and death of the little girls. Allegedly, his wife herself dealt with the children, and he, in a fit of anger and despair, killed her. Of course, such a version of events caused great doubt among the investigators. To shed light on what really happened that fatal night, the cops decided to carefully study all possible evidence. One of the most valuable sources of information was the video recording from the surveillance camera installed on the house of the Watts family's neighbor. This camera covered the area in front of the neighbor's house, part of the driveway, and part of the Watts yard. And it was on this recording that we saw something very suspicious and alarming. Early in the morning on August 13, around 5:30 a.m., the video clearly shows Chris Watts loading something large and heavy, wrapped in a bedsheet, into his car. The most interesting thing is that none of the video recordings showed Shannon leaving the house after returning home. We saw her going inside, but never noticed her coming out alone or with the children, so it was not difficult for us, the investigators, to understand the real picture of the events. We concluded that on that fatal night, Chris Watts not only killed his wife, but also took the lives of his own children, and then in the morning he cold-bloodedly took their bodies out of the house, wrapping them in a sheet. It would seem that having such evidence, the investigators could expect a full confession from Chris. But not quite. Before telling the truth, the suspect made an unexpected request. He wanted to talk to his father in private. The cops allowed this meeting, and Chris's father entered the interrogation room. There was a conversation between father and son, after which Chris finally dared to tell his version of what happened. What we heard from the suspect shocked not only the detectives and investigators, but everyone involved in this case. No one expected to hear such chilling and sinister details from a person who recently spoke so touchingly about his love for his wife and children. Chris claimed that on that night, a quarrel broke out between him and Shannon after he confessed to her his intention to divorce. Allegedly, Shannon, in a fit of rage and jealousy, killed their daughters, and when Chris saw this, he could not restrain himself and strangled his wife in a surge of anger and despair. Of course, this version of events caused me great doubt. I understood that criminals often try to shift the blame onto their victims, especially when it comes to such monstrous crimes. But even assuming that Shannon could really harm her own children, does this justify the cold-blooded murder by Chris? And how to explain the fact that he took the bodies of his loved ones out of the house and tried to hide traces of the crime? No, something definitely didn't add up in this story. Chris Watts finally dared to tell his version of the events of that fatal night. He claimed that an extremely emotional conversation took place between him and Shannon, during which the man admitted that their marriage had reached a dead end. It seemed that both understood that they had no happy future together. But what Chris told next shocked me, even as I'm recording this video for you now, although I've read my script hundreds of times and everyone present in the interrogation room. According to the man, before leaving for work, he decided to look at the baby monitor and saw a terrible picture. Shannon was standing by the crib of their younger daughter, Celeste, and seemed to be trying to strangle the girl. Chris insisted that at that moment, their older daughter, Bella, ran into the room in a fit of rage, and when her father rushed there, he saw the girl all bruised. Unfortunately, she was no longer breathing. According to Chris, he did not have time to save Celeste either when the man burst into the nursery. His wife had already strangled the younger daughter as well. In a state of shock and anger, seeing how Shannon had cold-bloodedly taken the lives of their children, Chris allegedly lost control of himself. He claimed that he attacked his wife and strangled her in response. He said he did to her the same thing she had done to the babies. Further, Chris said that in the heat of that fatal quarrel, Shannon allegedly threatened to forever deprive him of the opportunity to see his daughters. And apparently, immediately after that, she went to carry out her monstrous plan of revenge. After these confessions, Chris finally told the investigators where he had hidden the bodies of his family. The police immediately went to the place indicated by the suspect, and a terrible discovery awaited them there. It turned out that Chris had taken his deceased wife and daughters to his place of work, where oil tanks were located. Shannon's body was found in a shallow grave about 40 miles from their home. And very close by, in tanks for storing crude oil, the police came across a horrifying find: the bodies of little Bella and Celeste. The unfortunate girls were stuffed by their father into the tanks, where they were completely hidden by the thick black liquid. I couldn't help but notice the strange discrepancies in their story. Let's assume that a serious quarrel really took place between the spouses, and in a fit of passion, Shannon could have attacked the children. But isn't it strange that Chris didn't try to stop her, call the police or an ambulance? Instead, he, according to his own confession, resorted to lynching and killed his wife, and even hid the bodies of his loved ones in such a monstrous way. Of course, I understand and know that people in a state of passion can do strange and terrible things. But damn it, something definitely didn't add up in this story. It was too convenient for Chris to shift all the blame onto his deceased wife, portraying himself as almost a hero who became a victim of circumstances. During the interrogations, Chris Watts repeatedly stated that the reason for the tragedy was that lately, he and Shannon had been living as if in parallel worlds. They say both paid a lot of attention to the children, but completely stopped being interested in each other and working on their relationship. But soon, a new twist appeared in this story, which made the cops look at the situation from a completely different angle. It turned out that Chris had an affair on the side with a woman named Nicole Kessinger. Chris's acquaintance with Nicole did not happen by chance. The woman worked under a contract at the same company as Chris, and it was during the period when Shannon and her daughters were visiting relatives in North Carolina that a passion flared up between Chris and Nicole. Interestingly, Chris told his new lover a completely different story than later to law enforcement officials. He told Nicole that he and his wife had long been in the process of divorce and that the separation was happening by mutual agreement. For some reason, Chris kept silent about Shannon's pregnancy with their third child. Later, when the truth came out, Nicole claimed that if she had known about the difficult circumstances in her lover's family, she would never have gotten into this relationship. But Chris was clearly not going to honestly admit that he had a wife and was about to become a father for the third time. The relationship between Chris and Nicole developed rapidly, despite the fact that it had begun quite recently. The lovers were already planning to get married and even discussing the details of the upcoming wedding. The day before Shannon and the girls disappeared, Nicole even started looking for a wedding dress. But the most interesting thing happened when the disappearance of Chris Watts' wife and children gained publicity and shook the entire community. It was Nicole, having learned about this story from the news, who turned to the police and told about her affair with Chris. She confirmed that at the beginning of their relationship, she visited the Watts house twice, although her visits were short. In addition, Nicole suggested that the real motive for Chris's actions could be financial problems. He allegedly repeatedly complained about a difficult situation and debts. Though what most alarmed the woman was the fact that on the night when the family's disappearance was announced, she called Chris and he was calmly going to bed, as if nothing had happened. When asked about his wife, he replied that she had probably just decided to leave him, taking the children with her. It seemed extremely strange to Nicole how could a man react so indifferently to the disappearance of his loved ones. It was then that she realized that something was wrong with this story and decided to go to the police. Later, Nicole actively cooperated with the investigation, trying to help find the truth. Of course, we had certain suspicions about Nicole's possible involvement in this case, but we never found any evidence against her. It seems that the woman really did not know about the real state of affairs in the Watts family and became only an involuntary witness to the terrible events. As the investigation found out, there were indeed problems in Chris and Shannon's marriage in recent months. Feelings had cooled, and the couple often had arguments and misunderstandings. Shannon herself decided to go with her daughters to visit relatives in order to give her husband time to think and sort himself out. Here is an excerpt from Shannon's letter, written on August 5, just a few days before the tragedy. She wrote to Chris, "I'm trying to give you space, but while you're working and seeing a cool life, I'm carrying our third child. Every day I argue with our two children and try to work and earn money, and it's probably hard for you to write even a text message saying love you, miss you. I keep looking at my phone and waiting for your call. Has it really been 8 years since we started dating and we already have 3 children? We probably need to talk." It would seem that despite all the problems, Shannon loved her husband and was ready to fight for their marriage. But at the same time, she understood that if Chris no longer loved her, it was not worth continuing the relationship just for the sake of the children. These lines vividly demonstrate the emotional state the woman was in during those days. She was ready for anything to save her family, but not at the cost of her own happiness and dignity. It was important for me to recreate a complete picture of what was happening in the Watts family in the months before the tragedy. Only in this way could one understand the true motives and reasons that pushed Chris to this terrible crime. After all, I did not believe his confessions that Shannon allegedly killed the children herself in a fit of rage. Of course, the couple was going through a crisis in their relationship, but can this be an excuse for such a horrible act? No, the real reasons lay much deeper in Chris's desire to get rid of family ties and start a new life with his mistress. And for the sake of this, he was ready to go to any lengths, even the most terrible crime. The investigation made it clear that Chris was simply tired of family life and responsibilities. He longed for new sensations, new love, and was ready to start from scratch. So much so that he even started looking for separate housing to move there with his mistress Nicole. Moreover, immediately after the murder of his wife and children, Chris put up the family home for sale. It seemed that he wanted to get rid of everything that reminded him of his former life as soon as possible. On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was charged with a whole list of accusations: 3 episodes of first-degree murder, 2 episodes of murdering minor children who were in his care, an episode of unlawful termination of pregnancy since Shannon was expecting their 3rd child, and 3 episodes of abuse of a corpse. To avoid the death penalty, on November 6, 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges. Already on November 19th, the court sentenced him to 5 consecutive life terms without the right to parole. In addition, for the unlawful termination of pregnancy, the man received an additional 48 years in prison, and for the abuse of the bodies of the deceased, another 36 years. Now he will have to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Only 2 months after the sentencing, Chris finally confessed to how it really happened. In a conversation with prison psychologists, he said that he had not loved his wife for a long time, but did not dare to divorce. Watts feared that Shannon would forbid him from seeing the children. That is why he had an affair on the side with Nicole, who worked at the same company. Interestingly, Chris himself showed interest in her and even lied that he was getting divorced and no longer wearing a wedding ring. It seems that even then he was planning to start a new life with his mistress. The horrific details of the murder shocked even seasoned police officers and experts. According to Chris, that night he had a fight with his wife and strangled her with his bare hands in the bedroom. The autopsy results showed that Shannon was dying slowly and trying to fight to the end. The most terrible thing is that the elder daughter Bella became an involuntary witness to her father's horrible act. Hearing suspicious sounds, the girl went into the bedroom and asked Chris what happened to her mother. He lied that Shannon was sick and needed rest. After that, Chris wrapped his wife's body in a sheet and carried it to the car. Little Bella and Celeste woke up at this time and saw the terrible picture. The girls began to cry, frightened and confused. And then Chris Watts crossed the last line of humanity. He strangled his little daughters, just as he had strangled their mother before. The last words of the elder Bella were forever etched in his memory: "Daddy, no." The girl tried to fight for her life until the last breath, but she had no chance against an adult man. After that, Chris took the bodies of his wife and children to the oil site where he worked. He buried Shannon in a shallow grave and threw the girls' bodies into oil tanks. Thus, he tried to hide traces of his monstrous crime. The judge who sentenced Chris Watts did not hide his indignation and disgust. He called this murder the most horrible and cruel of the thousands of cases he had to deal with over the years of his work. The father of the deceased Shannon spoke emotionally about his former son-in-law in the courtroom. He called Chris a soulless monster and expressed the hope that for the rest of his life, the faces of his victims Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and unborn baby Nico would stand before the killer's eyes. I know that my RIP will not bring them back to life, but I suggest that everyone who has watched up to this point write this phrase in the comments to honor the memory of these 3 innocent human souls. The father emphasized that Chris deserved nothing but to rot in prison for life. This case shook all of America and gained wide publicity in the press. It's hard to believe that a young father could commit such a horrible and senseless crime by killing his own family. His actions defy any logical explanation. Chris Watts is a true embodiment of evil, a cold-blooded murderer who took the lives of his closest people for the sake of an illusory happiness with a mistress. Looking at this young man, it is difficult to imagine that a real monster was hiding behind the mask of a loving family man. The only thing left for us is to remember the deceased Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and little Miko. They deserved a long and happy life filled with love and joy. Unfortunately, the person who was supposed to cherish and protect them turned out to be their killer. As a detective and as a father, I sincerely hope that the severe sentence for Chris Watts will serve as a warning to other potential criminals, and that the memory of Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico will forever remain in the hearts of those who knew and loved them, and their bright souls will finally find peace where there is no pain, no suffering, no betrayal. With this, I conclude my story about one of the most tragic and intricate cases in my career. Thank you for being with me and helping to uncover the truth about the death of the Watts family. There is a widespread belief in the world that the lives of American schoolchildren revolve around football. This idea is reinforced by countless Hollywood movies, where the most popular and beautiful girl is always a cheerleader, and her boyfriend is invariably the captain of the football team. The people involved in the story we are about to discuss seem to have stepped off the screens of such films, but unfortunately, the happy ending typical of these movies did not happen in reality. And today, we will examine the case of Emma Walker. Central High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. The football stadium is illuminated by bright lights, and the energy of the fans is off the charts. The entire town has gathered to support their beloved football team, the Bobcats. The cheerleaders and the school band do not give the spectators a single second of respite. In the fall of 2014, a new face appeared among the cheerleaders. 14-year-old Emma Walker became the only freshman to make it onto the team that year. Everyone around her described her as a cheerful, energetic girl with a charming smile. Emma took her new activity with great responsibility, and she truly enjoyed the atmosphere of football competitions. However, despite her success in sports, Emma was also an extremely intelligent and diligent student. She dreamed of becoming a nurse in the neonatal unit to care for sick or prematurely born babies. During cheerleading practice, Emma caught the attention of one of the football team players who played the receiver position, William Riley Gall, known simply as Riley among his friends. He noticed Emma on the edge of the football field, and a spark immediately ignited between them. Riley, who was only 2 years older than Emma, had already managed to become the best player on the team and gained considerable popularity among his classmates. He was a member of the local church, loved video games, and according to his friends, had a rather specific sense of humor. At the time he met Emma, Riley was already in a romantic relationship with another girl. But soon after, he ended that relationship to start dating Emma, the most talented player on the school football team and a charming young cheerleader. In American high schools, such couples are simply destined to become popular among their peers. Riley quickly found common ground with Emma's family, and as her parents recounted, he made the impression of a pleasant, well-mannered, and polite young man. But after some time, their opinion of him changed when they learned that Riley had kept his promise to his ex-girlfriend and went with her to the junior prom. As for the senior prom, he went with Emma. Emma's parents considered such behavior frivolous and were displeased that, in their opinion, their daughter was not a priority for Riley. But Emma herself didn't seem too bothered by it. Her social media pages were filled with photos of her and Riley together, showing the couple having fun and spending time with each other. Emma's friends didn't know Riley well as a person. At first, they justified this by his shy and reserved nature. But over time, it became apparent that this was not the case, and they began to consider the guy somewhat strange. Many of them noted that Riley's behavior gradually revealed his desire to isolate Emma from communicating with anyone but himself. He showed himself as a jealous owner who seeks to control the girl's every move. Emma's friends, concerned about the situation, shared their fears with her. They warned that such relationships rarely lead to anything good and advised her to reconsider whether she really needed it. However, Emma dismissed their concerns, assuring them that it was just an outward impression and that there was nothing to worry about. Emma's parents, in an attempt to put an end to their daughter's toxic relationship, took away her phone to prevent contact with her boyfriend. But Riley found a way out. He bought Emma an iPod Touch so they could secretly text each other. Over the course of 2 years, the couple broke up and got back together many times. But with each breakup, their relationship became increasingly poisonous. The breakups became more serious and dramatic, and the fights more frequent. Riley constantly called Emma and bombarded her with messages one after another. When the girl got a job, he could wait for her at the entrance for hours to continue the conflict face-to-face. Once, in a fit of emotion, he even shouted, You're dead to me. I'll write your obituary." But every time an offensive message was inevitably followed by an apology. "I'm sorry for my behavior. You're the most precious thing in the world to me." As Mark and Jill, Emma's parents, recount, they repeatedly tried to persuade their daughter to end the relationship. "He found a way to distance her from us and convince her that he was her only one," Jill shares. The more they tried to prevent Emma from seeing Riley, the more actively their daughter defended him. By the fall of 2016, the situation remained unchanged. Riley had enrolled in Maryville College, located a half-hour drive from home, while 16-year-old Emma continued to attend high school. "I wish you would come back to Knoxville. I miss the days when we could see each other every day," she wrote to him. At the end of October 2016, Emma's parents, in a desperate attempt to help their daughter, forbade her from going anywhere except school and cheerleading practice. They began closely monitoring where she went, whom she met with, and what she did. And amazingly, it yielded the desired results. As Emma's father, Mark, notes, she began spending more time with her family and friends again, and her cheerfulness returned. Moreover, in correspondence with her friend Keegan, she reported that she and Riley had broken up peacefully after she saw photos of him hugging girls from his college. Emma's friends breathed a sigh of relief, as they had feared that Riley would not let her go so easily. On Friday, November 18, 2016, with her parents' permission, Emma went to a party at her close friend's house. Around 11:30 p.m., her friend Zach also arrived there. Emma quickly pulled him inside and told him that she was receiving mysterious text messages from an unknown number. One of the messages said, "Come outside alone if you don't want someone close to you to get hurt. Take your keys and go to your car. Otherwise, it won't end well for him." Emma assumed it might be a prank by one of Riley's friends. In response, she wrote that she would go to the police, but the threat had no effect, and the messages became even more alarming. One of them said that Riley's body had been dumped in front of the house. Emma and Zach went outside and saw that someone was indeed lying face down in a ditch nearby. It turned out to be Riley. When they approached him, he was holding his head and seemed disoriented. The guy said that he had been kidnapped and had no idea how he ended up there. Emma burst into tears and said through her sobs that they had broken up and asked him to leave her alone. Then Riley, extremely depressed, got up and walked down the street alone. On the way, he called his friend Noah, telling him about the kidnapping. But Noah didn't believe a word he said. Emma spent a restless night with her friends, and after 10 a.m., she headed home with her friend Haley, who lived nearby. As the girls were approaching the house, they noticed a suspicious young man dressed all in black walking down the street not far from Emma's place of residence. After dropping off Haley, Emma returned home alone. She went inside intending to change clothes before meeting her mom, but the mysterious stranger returned and started knocking and ringing the doorbell. The frightened girl sent messages to her friends and also to the person who, in her opinion, was always ready to come to her aid, Riley. In the message she wrote, "I hate you, but I need you right now." He replied that he was rushing to her, and when he finally arrived, the mysterious stranger was gone. However, Emma's friend Haley claimed that she recognized Riley himself as the guy in black. According to her, she saw his car parked nearby and even sent him a message asking what he was doing near Emma's house, to which Riley replied with a denial. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, having received an alarming message from her daughter about the suspicious stranger, came home and found Emma talking to Riley in the yard. The woman reminded the couple about the undesirability of his presence near her daughter and asked him to leave. Emma was trembling with fear, worried that it could have been a robber trying to break into the house. Jill, on the contrary, doubted the coincidence of the situation, but Emma continued to insist on Riley's non-involvement in the incident. After this incident, Jill and Mark Walker, extremely concerned about their daughter's safety, decided to drive the girl to work themselves in the morning, spend the day with her there, and return home together in the evening. The evening of Sunday, November 20th, 2016, at the Walker family home was quiet and peaceful. Emma was chatting with her friend Keegan and went to bed around midnight. Shortly after midnight, Riley, who had returned to Maryville, asked his roommate to borrow his phone. From this phone, he called Emma, and as Riley himself later claimed, during the conversation, Emma told him about her unwillingness to be together. According to him, after that, their conversation was suddenly cut off. Then Riley bombarded Emma with numerous text messages and made about 40 calls, leaving a myriad of voice messages on the answering machine. However, Emma did not respond, and eventually, Riley stopped trying to contact her. In the middle of the night, Mark, Emma's father, woke up to the sound of footsteps in the house and 2 slams of doors. He got up, walked around the house, looked into the bedrooms of Emma and her brother, but noticed nothing suspicious. Assuming that he had imagined it, Mark returned to bed. Around 6 in the morning, Jill went to Emma's room to wake her up for school. She called the girl by name, but she did not answer. Approaching the bed, the woman touched her daughter's leg, but Emma remained motionless. Looking at the girl's face, Jill immediately realized the need to call an ambulance immediately. Emma was pale and her lips had turned a bluish tint. Jill tried to feel for a pulse, but to no avail.
What's going on there?
I'm just trying to wake up my daughter for school, and she has no pulse.
Stay on the line. I'm transferring you to Rural Metro.
Rural Metro, can you tell me what's going on? She's non-responsive. She's gone. Okay, is she breathing? No. Her tongue's hanging out of her mouth. Is she laying on her back? Yes.
16-year-old Emma Walker was dead. Soon, the police arrived at the Walker house. Near Emma's mouth, a small amount of blood was found, and everything indicated that she had vomited after swallowing something. However,
the police officer's attention was drawn to a barely noticeable but extremely suspicious hole in the wall of Emma's bedroom. It was a bullet hole. While the girl was sleeping, someone had shot her in the head through the wall. 2 shell casings were found outside the house, and law enforcement needed to determine where the second shot had hit. After examining the perimeter of the house, the police eventually discovered another bullet hole at approximately the same height as the first one. This shot was also fired in the direction of Emma's bedroom, and its exit hole was located directly next to her bed. Both holes were located about 1.5 meters from the bedroom window, and the shots were fired between 230 and 300 a.m. One bullet hit the girl behind her left ear and probably instantly took her life. The second bullet got stuck in Emma's pillow. Whoever committed this crime knew exactly the location of the room and the position in which the girl would be lying. Social media exploded with sympathetic messages about Emma's tragic death. Among them were tweets from Riley Gall. "I love you, Emma. I can't be there yet. It's too soon. I know that. You know how much I want to be there. But I understand that I can't. I love you. My beautiful Emma." 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8. Be sure to remind God about it. I love you. Forever and always. Every day without Emma Walker. I love you, beautiful. And I know that you are in a better place now. During one of the matches of the local football team, the cheerleaders released pink balloons into the sky in memory of their prematurely deceased friend. When the police began questioning Emma Walker's family and friends, one name invariably came up again and again: Riley Gall. Some of Riley's friends, concerned about his condition after Emma's passing, told detectives about a secret he had shared with them the day after his alleged kidnapping. According to them, Riley said that he now feared for his own life, so he was carrying his grandfather's pistol with him. He even showed this weapon to his friend Alex. Another friend of Riley's, Noah, told investigators that Riley had inquired about how to get rid of fingerprints on a gun. However, Riley noted that he was asking not for himself, but for his roommate. It is noteworthy that just one day before Emma's death, Riley's grandfather reported the disappearance of this very pistol to the police. Riley also asked his friends Noah and Alex to help him get rid of the weapon by throwing it into the Tennessee River. But according to him, it was not at all because it had anything to do with Emma's death. He allegedly wanted to get rid of the pistol because he was afraid that it might get him into trouble and the police would try to link him to the case. On the day of the tragedy, the police talked to Riley for several hours, and the more he spoke, the more gaps appeared in his version of events.
I heard a stray bullet came to the wall, but that made no sense to me because it's her room. If a stray bullet hit the wall, it would have to be from the backyard because that's where her window is. No, I don't know, that one didn't make sense to me, but those are the main 3.
Despite his assurances that he was in Maryville at the time of the crime, an analysis of his phone revealed that this was not true. According to satellite data, at midnight, his phone was on the highway on the way from Maryville to Knoxville. Moreover, around 3:45 a.m., his phone was detected near Emma's house, while, according to the forensic examination, the girl died between 2:30 and 3:00 a.m. The officers also questioned Riley about the gun and all the information obtained from Noah and Alex, but he denied ever discussing anything like that with them. The detective asked him, "Did you ever talk to Noah about removing fingerprints from a gun?" Riley replied, "No." At this stage, Riley remained the only suspect, but there was still insufficient evidence for an arrest. As soon as he left the police station, he sent a message to Noah and Alex, asking them not to communicate with the police anymore and ordering them to delete all messages from him. Riley had no idea that his friends would ignore his request and continue to cooperate with law enforcement, as they had been doing from the first minutes after learning about Emma's death. They wanted to assist the investigation and knew they could help find the murder weapon. At first, the police hesitated, warning about possible risks to their safety. But Alex and Noah resolutely stated that it did not scare them, and they were determined to help solve this case. I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid that if we didn't do this, no one would answer for Emma's death, said Alex McCarthy. In close cooperation with the police, Noah and Alex devised a plan to expose Riley's lies. They agreed with him to supposedly help throw his grandfather's pistol into the river. According to the plan, the police were to wait nearby and arrest Riley as soon as he took out the weapon. Alex and Noah, in turn, were supposed to send the officers a code word that would serve as a signal for action. The guys were equipped with microphones and hidden cameras, and the operation finally started.
They interrogated me for 2.5 hours. If they could, they would have arrested me already.
After filming this video, all three of them went to the river, picking up the gun that Riley had been hiding in his stepfather's house the whole time. When they finally arrived at the location, Riley pulled out the gun, intending to get rid of it. But thanks to Noah and Alex, the police were already on standby. 48 hours after the discovery of Emma's lifeless body, the perpetrator was arrested. Riley Gall was charged with the murder of Emma Walker. In the trunk of his car, the police found black clothing and shoes. It became evident that a few days earlier, it was Riley who was the mysterious stranger in black who had been pounding on the door of the Walker family's house. The trial of Riley Gall began only a year and a half later, and he pleaded not guilty. He chose not to testify, and his lawyers did not call any witnesses. The defense was not built on an attempt to deny the fact of the shots. Their main goal was to prove that the bullets that took Emma's life hit her accidentally. They insisted that by shooting at the walls, Riley was simply trying to scare Emma. He supposedly could not have imagined that the bullets would go through the walls. Thus, he allegedly wanted her to get scared and turn to him for help, and then he would have a chance to restore their relationship. His lawyer stated that Riley wanted Emma to see him as a hero who would rush to save her. But everything went wrong when the bullets hit the young girl sleeping peacefully in her bedroom, taking her life. Further, the defense appealed to the jury, stating that even if they found him guilty, it could only be manslaughter, which, by the way, carries a much shorter prison sentence compared to intentional murder. Lawyer's statement: everything they say about intent towards Emma Walker is fully consistent with an attempt to scare her, because by scaring her, he hoped that she would contact him, and he would try to rekindle the relationship. I'm not saying it's logical. Don't think I'm claiming that there's any logic to it, because there isn't. But it fits the facts known to us from the witnesses. It fits the facts stated by the prosecutor, and we know that such behavior was typical of Emma, as she had recently already asked Riley to save her. However, the prosecutor insisted that it was intentional murder motivated by anger.
I knew how to fire a gun. I thought that he pled guilty in the beginning of this case to shooting a firearm into an occupied dwelling. I thought he did that. And so the relevance of whether or not he knew how to shoot a gun was gone. It doesn't matter. He knows how to shoot a gun. He admits to it. And so yet you spend time in your closing argument to say why he's only learned from PlayStation and to Call of Duty and wall banging that you can shoot through walls with a gun. It's a waste of your time. He knew how to shoot a gun. He pled guilty to shooting a gun.
Will you please stand? Mr. Gilder, in count one, the first defined offense charging the defendant with first-degree murder, did the jury reach a verdict?
Yes, we did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
And for the lesser included offense of stalking, did the jury reach a verdict?
We did.
What is your verdict?
Guilty.
The jury found William Riley Gall guilty of first-degree murder, as well as stalking, theft, and illegal possession of a firearm. In the state of Tennessee, a conviction for first-degree murder automatically carries a life sentence. Riley Gall was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 51 years. By that time, he will be over 70 years old. In May 2021, It became known that Riley Gall was trying to seek an acquittal, citing insufficient evidence. However, his petition was denied. Emma was supposed to graduate from high school in 2018, but instead, her family received her diploma. Her graduation cap and gown lay on the chair that would have been her seat. At the school where she studied, a scholarship was established in her honor. Jill Walker, Emma's mother, said that her daughter's love for animals and desire to become a nurse for newborns eloquently testify to the kind of person she was. Since then, the Walker family has opened a dog shelter and a neonatal rehabilitation unit at the Children's Hospital of East Tennessee, which also bear Emma Walker's name. According to Jill Walker, everything they do is aimed at ensuring that people remember Emma and never forget that they should always be a little kinder.